Cassidy Thornwood, 32, stood alone in her wedding dress, staring at rows of empty seats where her family should have been. Not a single relative showed up, not her parents, not her brother, not even her beloved grandmother. The photographer awkwardly suggested they delay. Her fiancé James squeezed her hand reassuringly, but nothing could fill the void of her missing family. Little did Cassidy know that this painful betrayal would set in motion a series of revelations that would shatter everything she thought she knew about blood loyalty. Hey everyone, before I dive into what might be the most painful day of my life, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If this family drama resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about family dynamics gone wrong. Trust me, what happened after my empty wedding will make you question everything about family loyalty. Growing up in Millfield, Connecticut, I was the eldest daughter of Richard and Diana Thornwood, respected figures in our community. My father ran a successful financial consulting firm, while my mother organized charity galas and served on multiple community boards. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family. My younger brother Ethan excelled in sports, I was the academic achiever, and our holiday cards always featured coordinated outfits and beaming smiles. Our colonial-style house with its manicured lawn was featured twice in local magazines, and dinner conversations revolved around achievements and appearances. Thornwoods never fail, my father would say, raising his glass at every family gathering. My grandmother Margaret, whom we all called Nana, lived in the guest house after my grandfather passed away when I was 12. She was my sanctuary in a home that increasingly felt like a performance stage. Behind closed doors, however, the Thornwood family operated on rigid expectations. My father demanded excellence in everything: perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect life trajectories. My mother reinforced these expectations with subtle but persistent criticism. Cassidy, that dress makes your shoulders look broad. Or, wouldn't you rather pursue law instead of photography? Creative careers are so unpredictable. Despite the pressure, I excelled academically, graduating top of my class and earning a scholarship to Cornell University. I chose business marketing as my major, a compromise between my passion for creativity and my parents' insistence on a respectable career. College offered my first taste of freedom, but family obligations kept me tethered to Millfield. Every holiday, every summer break, I returned home to maintain the facade of family harmony. Ethan took a different approach. He rebelled in high school, skipping classes, sneaking out at night, dating girls my parents deemed inappropriate. While my transgressions were met with icy disappointment, his resulted in explosive arguments. I often played mediator, smoothing tensions between my brother and parents. He's just finding himself, I'd tell them, while privately urging Ethan to comply just enough to keep peace. The summer after my junior year of college marked a turning point. I interned at a marketing firm in New York and met James Henderson, a graphic designer whose quiet confidence and genuine kindness captured my heart. He came from a modest family in Ohio. His father was a high school teacher, his mother a nurse. The first time he visited Millfield, the contrast between our families was stark. "Your parents are intense," he said afterward, choosing his words carefully. "They just have high standards," I replied automatically, the defense mechanism ingrained since childhood. James shook his head. "There's a difference between high standards and conditional love, Cass." His words lingered, but I brushed them aside. Family loyalty ran deep in the Thornwood blood. We might not be demonstrative with affection, but we stood by each other. Or so I believed. After graduation, I accepted a position at a prestigious marketing firm in Boston, close enough to visit home regularly, but far enough to build my own life. James followed, securing a job at a design agency. We moved in together after dating for 3 years, which already raised eyebrows in my family. My mother made her disapproval clear during our monthly phone calls. "Living together before marriage sends the wrong message, Cassidy." What will the Hendersons think? The irony wasn't lost on me. The Hendersons couldn't care less about our living arrangements. They welcomed me with open arms, inviting us for casual Sunday dinners, where conversations flowed naturally and laughter wasn't reserved for public performances. Nana was the only Thornwood who seemed genuinely happy for me. During my visits home, she would pull me into the guest house for private conversations. "You've found someone who sees you, truly sees you," she said once, patting my hand. "That's rare, my dear. Don't let anyone diminish it." As my relationship with James deepened, my interactions with my parents grew increasingly strained. They questioned every decision we made together, from our apartment choice to our vacation plans. When James proposed after 5 years together, a private moment on the Boston Harbor at sunset, my parents' response was tepid at best. "He could have at least asked for your father's blessing," my mother sniffed when I called with the news. "And a diamond that small. Is he having financial troubles?" Ethan, who had eventually straightened out his path and was now working for my father's firm, offered half-hearted congratulations. "If he makes you happy, sis," he said, his voice distant. Only Nana expressed genuine joy, sending us a bottle of champagne with a note that read, "To love without conditions, the greatest gift." Planning the wedding became a battleground. My mother pushed for an elaborate country club affair, with hundreds of guests, most of whom were her social connections, rather than people I cared about. James and I wanted something more intimate, reflecting our actual relationships rather than social obligations. "A small wedding looks like you're ashamed," my mother argued during one particularly tense dinner. "The Thornwood name means something in this community." "Maybe it shouldn't," I replied, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Maybe it's okay to just be Cassidy and James, not Thornwood Enterprises hosts its daughter's society wedding." The silence that followed was deafening. My father set down his fork with deliberate precision. "You've changed since meeting him," he said, making him sound like an accusation. "Your priorities are becoming concerning." Something in me snapped that evening. Years of suppressing my true self, of contorting to fit the Thornwood mold, crystallized into a moment of clarity. My priority is building a life with someone who loves me for who I am, not what family I represent. We left soon after, the tension unresolved. In the following weeks, communication became increasingly strained. My parents' calls centered on wedding logistics rather than genuine interest in my happiness. Ethan became more distant, canceling our regular sibling lunch dates with vague excuses. Only Nana maintained her warmth, though even her calls seemed hurried, as if she feared being overheard. When James and I finally selected a charming historic inn 2 hours from Millfield for our wedding venue, my mother's disapproval was palpable. "No one will drive that far," she warned. "You're intentionally making this difficult." Perhaps I was. Perhaps after years of bending to accommodate the Thornwood image, I needed this one day to reflect my actual desires. I sent out invitations 8 weeks before the wedding date, elegant but simple cards that James had designed himself. The RSVP cards trickled in slowly with conspicuous silence from my family members. "They'll come around," James assured me, though I could see the concern in his eyes. "They're your family. They wouldn't miss your wedding." But as the weeks passed and our special day approached, that assumption would be tested in ways I never imagined possible. The morning of my wedding dawned, with perfect autumn sunshine streaming through the windows of my suite at the Oak Ridge Historic Inn. The venue was everything I had dreamed of, a restored 19th-century mansion with gardens still blooming with late-season flowers, far from the sterile country club ballrooms my mother preferred. My 2 closest friends from college, Meredith and Sophia, bustled around the room, arranging my veil and keeping champagne glasses filled. "Your hair looks amazing," Sophia gushed, adjusting a loose curl. "James is going to lose his mind when he sees you." I smiled at my reflection, feeling a mixture of joy and unease. My dress, an elegant A-line with vintage lace details, was exactly what I wanted, not the princess ball gown my mother had pushed for. The simplicity suited me, yet I couldn't shake the hollow feeling in my stomach. My phone remained silent, no congratulatory texts from my parents or brother. "Have you heard anything?" I asked Meredith, trying to sound casual as she applied my makeup. She exchanged a quick glance with Sophia before answering. "Nothing new. But they still have 2 hours before the ceremony. They could just be running late." I nodded, though we all knew the Thornwoods were never late. Punctuality was another family mandate, alongside achievement and appearances. My father often said tardiness is a form of disrespect, one of many maxims that governed our household. As the morning progressed, the absence of family messages grew from concerning to alarming. I called my mother's cell phone, which went straight to voicemail. Same with my father's. Even Ethan didn't pick up. Only Nana's phone rang, though she too didn't answer. I left increasingly anxious messages for each of them, trying to keep panic from my voice. "Maybe there's an emergency," Sophia suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. "Or traffic," Meredith added weakly. "The GPS sometimes sends people on a weird route here." By noon, an hour before the ceremony, the wedding coordinator knocked gently on my door. Linda, a kind woman in her 50s who had guided us through planning, wore an expression that confirmed my fears. "Cassidy, I've been checking guests in downstairs," she said carefully. "I noticed your family members haven't arrived. Would you like me to call them?" "I've been trying," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the earthquake happening inside me. "No one's answering." Linda nodded, professional compassion in her eyes. "We can delay the start time if you'd like. Sometimes family just runs behind." "But not my family." "Never my family." The Thornwoods were pathologically punctual, almost competitive about being first to arrive at events. This wasn't tardiness, this was absence. Deliberate absence. At 1230, James sent a text, "Everything okay up there? Guests are asking about the timeline." I couldn't bring myself to respond. How could I tell my soon-to-be husband that my entire family had apparently boycotted our wedding? At 1245, I made a decision. "We're starting on time," I told Linda, squaring my shoulders. "With or without them." Meredith and Sophia exchanged worried glances but supported me. "It's your day," Meredith said firmly. "If they choose to miss it, that's their loss." Walking down to the ceremony area was surreal. The historic inn's garden had been transformed with white chairs and an arch of autumn flowers. Guests, mostly James's family and our mutual friends, sat chatting, unaware of the drama unfolding. On the right side of the aisle, 5 rows of chairs remained conspicuously empty seats, reserved for the Thornwood family and their friends. Standing at the entrance to the garden, I felt exposed. My father should have been beside me, ready to walk me down the aisle. Instead, James's father approached, concern etched on his kind face. "Cassidy," he said gently, "James told me what's happening. Would you allow me the honor of walking with you?" Tears welled in my eyes as I nodded. This man, who had shown me more genuine fatherly warmth in 5 years than Richard Thornwood had in my entire life, offered his arm with a smile. "You look beautiful," he said. "And my son is the luckiest man alive." The ceremony proceeded in a blur. I was acutely aware of the empty chairs, of the whispers among guests, of the photographer awkwardly avoiding capturing the vacant family section. James held my hands tightly as we exchanged vows, his eyes communicating what words couldn't. "I'm here. We're family now." During the reception, I maintained a careful smile, dancing with James and accepting congratulations from guests who politely avoided mentioning my family's absence. James's relatives embraced me with extra warmth, as if trying to compensate for the gaping Thornwood void. "Welcome to the family, sweetheart," James's mother whispered during our dance, squeezing me tight. "We're so happy you're ours now." As evening fell and the reception continued, I excused myself for a moment alone. Standing on the inn's stone terrace, I tried my family again. All calls went to voicemail. I sent a group text, "The ceremony is over. Your seats were empty. Please tell me you're all right at least." No response. I was contemplating what catastrophe could have prevented not just my immediate family but extended relatives from attending when my phone finally rang. The screen displayed Nana. Relief flooded through me as I answered. "Nana, are you okay? What happened? Where is everyone?" There was a pause. Then my grandmother's voice, usually so strong, came through, fragile and tearful. "Oh, my darling girl. I'm so sorry. I'm so very sorry. Are they hurt? Was there an accident?" I gripped the stone railing, bracing for news of tragedy. "No, nothing like that," Nana said, her voice hardening slightly. "They're fine, physically anyway. Morally is another question." "I don't understand," I said, though a sick feeling in my stomach suggested I was beginning to. "They decided not to come," she said, simply. "Your father declared it a family position. Anyone who attended would be—" She paused, disgust evident in her voice, cut off from the family. The world tilted beneath my feet. "But why control, my dear? You chose your own path. That venue instead of the country club. That dress instead of what your mother wanted. That man instead of someone they approved of." I finished, cold realization spreading through me. "But you. Why didn't you come, Nana?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'm not as strong as you, Cassidy. I'm old, and they control my care, my home. I was a coward. I will regret it until my dying day." As the call ended, I stood frozen on the terrace, the sounds of my wedding reception continuing behind me. My family hadn't come not because they couldn't, but because they wouldn't. It was a calculated statement, a collective punishment for my independence. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. The pain was still there, a raw wound that throbbed with each heartbeat, but alongside it grew something else, a quiet, cold resolve. The Thornwoods had made their choice. Now I would make mine. The days following our wedding passed in a strange juxtaposition of newlywed bliss and family trauma. James and I postponed our honeymoon to Italy, both recognizing I wasn't in the right emotional state for what should have been a carefree celebration. Instead, we returned to our Boston apartment where I alternated between rage, grief, and numbness. "They'll reach out eventually," James said one evening as we sat on our small balcony, the city lights blinking around us. "Once they realize what they've done." I wasn't so sure. The Thornwoods didn't apologize, another unwritten family rule. Mistakes were to be corrected, not acknowledged. Weakness was to be overcome, not admitted. My father's voice echoed in my memory. "Regret is just failure with a different name." Still, I couldn't help checking my phone constantly, hoping for some message, some explanation that would make sense of their collective abandonment. None came. My calls continued to go to voicemail, my texts unanswered. The silence was deafening, a statement louder than any words could have been. A week after the wedding, Nana called again. Her voice was hushed and I could tell she was calling from somewhere private. "They're acting like nothing happened," she reported, disbelief evident in her tone. "Your mother is already planning the Harvest Charity Gala. Your father is focused on some new client. Ethan is shadowing him at work. It's as if you never existed." The words cut deep despite my attempts to armor myself against further pain. "And no one is questioning this, none of their friends, none of the family." "Oh, they have a story," Nana replied bitterly. "They're telling everyone you eloped suddenly, that you specifically asked for privacy and no family presence. Some nonsense about you and James wanting an alternative ceremony that you knew the family wouldn't approve of." My hands trembled with anger. "That's a complete lie. We sent formal invitations weeks ago. People RSVP'd." "I know, darling, but you know how it works here. The Thornwood version becomes the truth simply because your father says it with enough authority." After hanging up with Nana, I paced our apartment Fury building with each step. James watched me with concern, offering support but giving me space to process. When my energy finally burned out, I collapsed onto our couch, emotionally exhausted. "I need answers," I said finally. "Not just about the wedding, about all of it. Why they've always been this way. Why control matters more than happiness. Why appearance trumps reality." James sat beside me, taking my hand. "What are you thinking? I need to go back to Millfield. Not to confront them, that won't work, but to dig deeper. There's something fundamentally broken in my family, and I need to understand what it is before I can move forward." The next day, I called in for a week of emergency personal leave at work. My boss, who had attended our wedding and witnessed the family no-show firsthand, was sympathetic. James couldn't take time off from his current project but supported my decision. "Just promise me you'll stay somewhere else, not in that house," he made me swear, "even if they suddenly welcome you with open arms." I promised, though I knew the likelihood of a warm welcome was non-existent. The drive to Millfield took just under 3 hours, memories flooding back with each familiar landmark. I bypassed my parents' neighborhood entirely, checking into a small bed and breakfast on the other side of town. From there, I began my investigation. My first stop was to see Mrs. Abernathy, my high school English teacher, who had been the closest thing to a confidant I had in Millfield. Now retired, she welcomed me with genuine warmth and concern when I appeared on her doorstep. "Cassidy, I heard you got married. Congratulations." She ushered me inside her book-filled home, as comforting as I remembered. As we settled with tea, her expression grew serious. "I also heard some concerning things about how it happened." I braced myself. "What exactly did you hear?" "That you ran off to get married without telling anyone. That you deliberately excluded your family." She studied my face carefully. "Which doesn't sound like you at all." "It's not true," I said simply, then shared what had actually happened. Mrs. Abernathy listened without interruption, her expression darkening. "I wish I could say I'm surprised," she said when I finished. "But there were always signs, weren't there? The way your father would speak to the school board as if his opinion was fact. How your mother organized events less like community gatherings and more like demonstrations of influence. But to miss their daughter's wedding, I still couldn't fully comprehend it." Mrs. Abernathy sighed deeply. "Power becomes a drug, Cassidy. And your father? Well, there have always been rumors about how he built his business. How the Thornwood name rose so quickly in this town. This caught my attention." "What kind of rumors?" "Nothing concrete," she said carefully. "But your grandfather's business failure was quite sudden, wasn't it? And your father's success came very quickly afterward." My grandfather, my father's father, had owned a manufacturing company that went bankrupt when my father was in college. It was rarely discussed, a chapter of family history deemed irrelevant to the current Thornwood narrative. My father had started his financial consulting firm shortly after building it into a regional powerhouse with remarkable speed. "Do you think there's a connection?" I asked, mind racing. "I think Mrs. Abernathy said carefully that families with secrets develop systems to maintain those secrets. Control becomes paramount. Loyalty becomes a weapon." Her words resonated with a lifetime of experiences, the strict rules, the emphasis on family unity above all else, the careful curation of our public image. What if it wasn't just my father's personality? What if it was protection of something deeper? Leaving Mrs. Abernathy's one drove to the Millfield Historical Society, where I had volunteered during high school. The director, Mr. Pembroke, was still there, his enthusiasm for local history undiminished by age. He greeted me warmly, and when I explained I was researching my family history for a wedding project, he eagerly pulled records. "The Thornwoods haven't been in Millfield as long as some families," he explained as we sat surrounded by archives. "Your grandfather moved here in the 52nds to start his business. Thornwood Manufacturing was quite successful for almost 2 decades before the bankruptcy in 1989. What caused the bankruptcy? I asked, realizing I'd never been told specifics. Mr. Pembroke's expression turned thoughtful. That's where it gets interesting. On paper, it was financial mismanagement. But there were allegations never proven of embezzlement. Some said money vanished, investors lost everything. Your grandfather was never charged, but his reputation was ruined. And my father, when did he start his firm? 1992, Mr. Pembroke said, consulting a local business directory. Just 3 years after the bankruptcy, quite a phoenix rising that one. Started with high-profile clients right away, which was unusual for a young man with no established reputation. As I left the Historical Society, pieces were beginning to form a disturbing pattern. My next stop was the Millfield Library, where I accessed digital archives of the local newspaper. Hours slipped by as I pieced together the story. Thornwood Manufacturing's collapse had indeed been sudden and complete. Investors, mostly local business owners and families, lost everything. My grandfather died of a heart attack just 1 year later, leaving my grandmother alone to raise my teenage father. Then, remarkably quickly, my father established his firm and began acquiring the same level of wealth and status his family had previously enjoyed. The society pages showed my parents' wedding, my mother coming from another well-established local family. Within a decade, they were fixtures of Millfield society, the bankruptcy a forgotten chapter. But something still felt missing: the connection between these events and my family's pathological need for control and image maintenance. That answer came from an unexpected source the next day when I gathered my courage and visited my grandmother's sister, Great Aunt Harriet, who lived in a retirement community just outside town. At 87, Aunt Harriet was the family rebel seldom invited to gatherings due to what my mother called her inappropriate reminiscing. She welcomed me with surprising strength in her embrace and a clarity in her eyes that belied her age. "So the prodigal niece returns," she said, with a wry smile. "I heard about your wedding, or rather, heard about who wasn't at your wedding." When I explained my quest for understanding, she nodded knowingly. "You're asking the right questions finally. The Thornwood disease of silence has gone on too long." What she told me over the next 2 hours would change everything I thought I knew about my family. "Your father," Aunt Harriet began, settling into her armchair, "with the deliberate movements of age, has built his entire life on a foundation of lies. And your wedding, that was the moment when those lies were threatened." The retirement community's common room was quiet that afternoon. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating floating dust particles between us, secrets finally emerging into the light. "I don't understand," I said, leaning forward. "How did my wedding threaten anything?" "Independence threatens control, my dear," Aunt Harriet replied. "And control is everything to Richard. Has been since he was a boy. But to understand why, you need to know what really happened with your grandfather's company." She took a sip of tea before continuing. "Thornwood Manufacturing didn't fail because of market forces, or even simple mismanagement. It failed because your grandfather Walter discovered something terrible. His financial controller, his trusted right-hand man, had been systematically embezzling funds, cooking the books for years." "Who was the controller?" I asked, though something inside me already knew the answer. "A young man who had worked his way up from the mailroom. Someone Walter treated like a son." Aunt Harriet's eyes locked with mine. "Gerald Nichols." The name hit me like a physical blow. Gerald Nichols, my father's godfather, the man who had funded my father's education after the bankruptcy, who had mysteriously passed away just as my father's firm was taking off. "When Walter discovered the embezzlement, he was devastated," Aunt Harriet continued. "Not just because of the money, but the betrayal. He confronted Gerald privately, giving him the chance to confess and make amends. Gerald promised he would." She paused, her gaze distant with memory. "The next day, Walter was called to an emergency board meeting. There sat Gerald with all the company directors presenting evidence that it was Walter who had been embezzling funds. He had doctored records, created a paper trail leading directly to your grandfather. It was a masterful frame job. But surely, people knew my grandfather trusted his character. I protested. Aunt Harriet's laugh held no humor. Evidence speaks louder than character, Cassidy. Especially when money is involved. The board had no choice but to remove Walter and report the findings. The company's reputation was already damaged beyond repair. Bankruptcy followed quickly. And my father, where was he during all this? Richard was at college studying finance. He came home when the scandal broke. Walter tried to explain what had happened, but Richard. She shook her head sadly. Richard chose not to believe him. It was easier to accept that his father had failed than to face the more complex truth. I tried to absorb this information, connecting it with what I already knew. So my father sided with Gerald against his own father, more than sided with him. After Walter died, Gerald became Richard's mentor, paid for him to finish college, introduced him to powerful connections. And when Richard started his firm, Gerald provided the initial clients. The pieces were falling into place: my father's rapid success, the unexplained wealth, the origins of his obsession with family loyalty and public image. But something still didn't make sense. If my father believed in Gerald, trusted him, why would he be so concerned about control and appearances? Wouldn't he just be grateful? Aunt Harriet's expression turned grave. Because eventually, Richard learned the truth. About 3 years into his business, he discovered evidence of what Gerald had actually done, irrefutable proof that his father had been innocent all along. By then, Walter was dead. The company was gone. And Richard's own business was built entirely on Gerald's connections, Gerald's money. What did he do? I whispered. What any Thornwood does when faced with uncomfortable truth, she replied bitterly. He buried it. But more than that, he made sure no one could ever use it against him. Gerald died very suddenly of natural causes shortly afterward. Richard took control of all his assets as his designated heir. And then he began constructing the impenetrable facade of the perfect family, the unimpeachable businessman. I felt sick, my mind racing through implications. Are you saying my father killed Gerald? Aunt Harriet's eyes widened. Good heavens, no, at least I don't believe so. Gerald had a heart condition. But the timing was convenient. And Richard certainly didn't mourn. Instead, he became obsessed with controlling the narrative, erasing any connection to scandal. Your mother, coming from an old Millfield family with an impeccable reputation, was part of that reconstruction. And that's why we had all those rules, I said slowly. The emphasis on perfect appearances, on family loyalty above all else. He was terrified of another betrayal, another scandal. Exactly. But it became pathological. He couldn't separate genuine family bonds from this. The stated performance of family. The appearance became more important than the reality. I tried to talk to your mother about it years ago, but by then she was fully committed to the illusion too. And Ethan, my brother, your brother, knows some of this. Not all, but enough. Richard has been grooming him to take over, which means selective revelations of family secrets. Enough to ensure loyalty, not enough to threaten control. As our conversation continued, more family mysteries began making sense. My father's refusal to ever discuss his parents, the way certain topics were absolutely forbidden at home, the obsession with maintaining a specific public image at all costs. And my wedding, I asked finally. Why would that trigger such an extreme reaction? Aunt Harriet sighed deeply. Several reasons. First, you chose James, a man with no connections useful to your father from a family that can't be easily controlled. Second, you insisted on your own wedding, your own choices, demonstrating dangerous independence. But most importantly, she hesitated. Most importantly, James's father, Martin Henderson. Did you know he worked in finance before becoming a teacher? I nodded, confused by the sudden change in direction. He was an investment banker in Chicago. He left to teach after burning out. Did you ever wonder why he left so suddenly, why they moved to a small Ohio town and drastically downsized their life? A chill ran down my spine. What are you saying? Martin Henderson worked for one of the investment firms that lost everything when Thornwood manufacturing collapsed. He was just starting his career, but that scandal nearly destroyed him. He had to rebuild from nothing. That can't be a coincidence, I whispered, mind reeling. In a financial world as interconnected as ours, perhaps it is. But your father wouldn't see it that way. The moment he learned James's last name, he would have investigated. And if he discovered that connection, he would see it as a threat. I finished, understanding dawning. He would assume James or his family knew about my grandfather, about Gerald. That they might be seeking some kind of revenge or justice. And nothing terrifies Richard more than his carefully constructed world being exposed. As I left Aunt Harriet's that evening, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from James. You need to come home, now. Someone broke into our apartment. Hey everyone, I know I've left you on a cliffhanger here. The mystery is deepening, and trust me, what happens next changed my life forever. If you're invested in my story and want to see where this family drama leads, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Are family secrets ever truly buried? Let me know in the comments what you think is going to happen next. I'll be reading your theories while I prepare the next part of this shocking family revelation. I drove back to Boston in a state of panic, my mind racing between what Aunt Harriet had revealed and fear for what might have happened at our apartment. James had been frustratingly vague in follow-up texts, saying only that nothing was stolen, but I needed to see for myself. The 3-hour drive felt eternal, every mile bringing new theories and mounting dread. When I finally reached our building, James was waiting in the lobby. His face, usually so open and relaxed, was tense with concern. Are you okay? I asked, rushing to embrace him. I'm fine, he assured me, holding me tightly for a moment before leading me to the elevator. But upstairs. It's not a random break-in, Cass. This was targeted. Our apartment door showed no signs of forced entry, which was the first red flag. Inside, everything appeared normal at first glance, no overturned furniture, no ransacked drawers. But James led me directly to our home office, where the violation became clear. My desk had been methodically searched. The filing cabinet was open, specific folders missing. My laptop was still there, but when I checked it, I discovered someone had accessed it. My password had been bypassed by someone with technical skill. What did they take? I asked, surveying the controlled chaos. Your family history research, James replied grimly. The folders with your grandfather's company, information, the financial records you've been collecting. And they accessed your cloud storage. The folder with Thornwood manufacturing articles is empty. Cold realization washed over me. This wasn't a robbery. It was a purge. Someone was systematically erasing my access to my own family history. There's something else, James said, quietly handing me a plain white envelope. This was on your keyboard. No postmark, nothing written on it. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery, the kind my father used for personal correspondence. The message was typed, not handwritten. Some doors should remain closed. This is your only warning, for James's sake, if not your own. The threat was unmistakable, made more chilling by its restraint. This wasn't blind rage, it was calculated intimidation. And the mention of James, that was the line that transformed my fear into anger. We need to call the police, James insisted. I shook my head slowly. And tell them what? That my father, a pillar of the community with friends in every police department in the state, is threatening us with a carefully worded note that contains no explicit threat. They won't take it seriously. Then we document everything and get a lawyer. James countered his protective instincts in full force. I paced the room, mind racing through options. We need leverage, not legal posturing. My father respects only one thing: power. If we're going to confront this, we need our own ammunition. That night, we barely slept, taking turns watching the door, despite the new security system we hastily installed. By morning, I had formed a plan, one that made James deeply uncomfortable. "You want to break into your father's office," he repeated incredulously. "After what just happened here, not break in," I clarified. "I still have the keys and security codes. My name is still on some of the family accounts. And I know exactly what I'm looking for now, thanks to Aunt Harriet." "It's too dangerous," James insisted. "These people, your family, they've already shown they'll go to extreme lengths, which is precisely why we can't just hide and hope this goes away." I took his hands in mine, willing him to understand. "They came into our home, James. They threatened you. This doesn't end until we end it." After hours of debate, we reached a compromise. I would go to Millfield, but not alone. James would come with me, along with his cousin Derek, who worked in digital security. We would document everything, make copies of anything we found, and most importantly, we would create insurance information that would be automatically released if anything happened to us. 2 days later, we executed the plan. The Thornwood Financial Consulting building was quiet on Sunday afternoon. My keycard still worked, either an oversight or more likely a deliberate choice to monitor my movements. We moved quickly to my father's office on the top floor, Derek disabling the security cameras with a device he assured us would make it look like a system glitch rather than tampering. My father's office was exactly as I remembered: immaculate, imposing with a view overlooking the town he considered his personal kingdom. The wall safe behind his fishing trophies, a hobby he maintained solely for business connections, opened to the combination. I remembered my parents' anniversary date. Inside, among insurance documents and property deeds, was a small leather journal I'd never seen before. My grandfather's initials were embossed on the cover, the pages yellowed with age. As I carefully photographed each page with Derek's specialized equipment, the true story of the Thornwood legacy emerged in my grandfather's precise handwriting: dates, amounts, names, evidence that Gerald Nichols had indeed embezzled funds and framed Walter Thornwood. But the most damning discovery came from my father's computer, which Derek accessed with disturbing ease. There, in an encrypted folder, labeled simply GN, were scanned documents proving my father had discovered Gerald's deception years ago. Financial records, confession letters, evidence that had never been made public. "He knew," I whispered, staring at the screen. "He knew his father was innocent, and did nothing to clear his name." More disturbing still were records of payments, substantial monthly transfers to the families of former Thornwood manufacturing investors who had lost everything, including the Hendersons. These weren't charitable donations. They were structured like settlements with strict confidentiality clauses. "He's been paying people off," James said, his voice hollow as he recognized his parents' names on the list, including my family. "Not just paying them off," Derek noted, examining the digital trail. "Monitoring them. There are surveillance reports here, going back years. Including on you, James. Long before you met Cassidy." The implications hit me like a physical blow. My father hadn't just discovered the Henderson connection after I introduced James. He had known all along, had possibly even engineered our meeting through his surveillance network. "We need to go," I said, suddenly gathering the copies we'd made. "Now." We were almost to the elevator when the lights came on throughout the floor. Standing by the reception desk was my brother Ethan, his expression unreadable. "I thought it might be you," he said calmly. "The security system sent an alert about unusual access patterns." "Ethan," I started, but he held up his hand. "Save it. I know why you're here." He glanced at James and Derek, then back to me. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Yes, I answered honestly, watching him carefully. Did you know about grandfather, about what dad's been doing? A complex emotion crossed his face, something between shame and resignation. Pieces, not everything. Enough to understand why appearance matters so much to him. Why control is necessary. Necessary, I echoed incredulously. He's been lying, manipulating, threatening people. He let grandfather die with his reputation destroyed when he knew the truth. And what would exposing it now accomplish? Ethan countered. Destroying the business, ruining our family name all over again. The payments have at least provided some restitution to those families. Hush money isn't justice, James interjected. Ethan's gaze hardened. What exactly is your plan here, Cassidy? Public exposure, destruction of everything our father built. Thinking about the collateral damage to everyone else in the family, his words hit their mark. I hadn't thought through the consequences for my mother, for Nana, even for Ethan himself. But before I could respond, the elevator doors opened behind us. My father stood there, his face a mask of cold fury. I always taught you that family loyalty was paramount, he said, his voice eerily controlled. Clearly the lesson didn't take. The office's atmosphere crystallized into something dangerous as my father stepped from the elevator, each movement deliberately measured. He was dressed as if for a normal workday in one of his impeccable suits, though it was Sunday afternoon, a detail that suggested he'd been alerted to our presence long before we realized. Richard James acknowledged, subtly shifting to stand partially in front of me. My father ignored him completely, his gaze fixed solely on me. In my office, he said, not a request, a command delivered with the absolute certainty it would be obeyed. Anything you have to say can be said right here, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Something dangerous flickered across his face, a brief crack in the composed facade. Very well. You've accessed private company documents without authorization. That's corporate espionage, possibly federal wire fraud, given the digital systems you've compromised. Your companions are equally culpable. Derek tensed beside us. The penalties for illegal surveillance and extortion are considerably steeper, he countered. My father's expression didn't change, but his focus shifted slightly, reassessing Derek with new interest. Ah, technical expertise. That explains the camera disruption. Ethan, call security. Wait, I interjected. We have copies of everything. Documents detailing Gerald Nichols' embezzlement, proof that grandfather was innocent. Records of your surveillance and payoff operations, all safely uploaded to secure servers. This finally penetrated his composure. A muscle twitched near his jaw, a tell I recognized from childhood confrontations. He was recalculating, reassessing the threat. What exactly do you want, Cassidy? He asked, his tone suggesting he was humoring a tiresome negotiation. The truth, I said simply. Public acknowledgement of grandfather's innocence. An end to the surveillance of the affected families. And you stay out of our lives completely and permanently. He actually laughed, though the sound contained no humor. You have no idea what you're asking. The legal implications alone would be your problem to solve, I finished. Just like you've solved all your other problems through money and influence. I don't care how you do it, only that it's done. My father's gaze shifted to Ethan, who had remained silent throughout this exchange. And you? Where do you stand in this family insurrection? Something in Ethan's posture changed, a straightening of his shoulders, a resolution in his eyes that I hadn't seen since we were children. I think Cassidy's right. Grandfather deserves to have his name cleared. The betrayal hit my father, visibly a physical recoil he couldn't entirely suppress. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his features. He was losing control of the narrative of his carefully constructed world. And nothing terrified Richard Thornwood more than loss of control. You don't understand what you're doing, he said, his voice lowered. The foundations this family is built on are lies, I interrupted, and we're done living with them. He stared at me for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then, surprisingly, he nodded toward his office. "We should discuss terms, privately." James squeezed my hand in warning, but I knew this might be our only opportunity. "Give us 5 minutes," I told him. "And Eric, if we're not back, release everything." My father's office felt different now that I knew what I was looking for: the careful construction of power and permanence, the strategic display of family photos that suggested dynasty rather than actual connection. He closed the door behind us, then moved to his desk, not sitting but standing behind it, maintaining the position of authority. "You believe you've discovered some great family secret," he began. "Some shocking revelation that changes everything. But you've only seen fragments, Cassidy. You don't understand the full picture." "Then explain it to me," I challenged. "Why did you let grandfather die with his reputation destroyed when you knew he was innocent? Why have you been monitoring the victims' families for decades? Why did you boycott my wedding rather than simply meet my fiancé like a normal father?" His expression hardened. "Your grandfather was weak. He trusted the wrong people, failed to protect what he built. I learned from his mistakes. As for the affected families, my monthly payments have given them comfortable lives they wouldn't otherwise have had. And James, his family, the surveillance, a dismissive wave, basic due diligence. When you first mentioned him, of course I investigated. The Henderson connection was concerning. I needed to ensure they weren't using you to get close to the family fortune." "That's absurd," I said, genuinely appalled. "They never even knew about the connection until we discovered your files." Perhaps he conceded, though his tone suggested skepticism. "But your choice to pursue your own wedding plans, to reject family tradition that demonstrated where your true loyalties lay. And a Thornwood who cannot be trusted with family loyalty cannot be trusted at all." The cold calculation of it struck me anew. So it was a test. The entire wedding debacle, having the entire family boycott one of the most important days of my life, was a loyalty test. "Which you failed," he replied, simply. "You chose them over family." "No," I said, my voice rising despite efforts to remain calm. "I chose love over control, authenticity over appearance. And most importantly, I chose to be my own person rather than another puppet in your performance of family." His expression darkened. "Theatrical metaphors aside, we have a practical situation to resolve. Your threats of exposure could damage many innocent people: your mother, your grandmother, the company employees who depend on their salaries." "Then meet my terms," I said firmly. "Clear grandfather's name. End the surveillance. Leave us alone." He studied me for a long moment, perhaps truly seeing me for the first time, not as an extension of himself or a piece in his grand design, but as an independent force he could no longer control. "I will need time to arrange matters," he said, finally. "Legal considerations, documentation that won't implicate the current company." 2 weeks, I stated. "After that we release everything." He nodded, once a businessman acknowledging terms. "And in exchange for my cooperation, you will destroy all copies of the materials you've acquired." "After verification that you've fulfilled your end," I countered. As we emerged from his office, James and Derek looked relieved. Ethan had disappeared, though, whether on our father's orders or his own initiative, I couldn't tell. We left quickly, the weight of the confrontation settling between us as we drove back to Boston. "Do you think he'll follow through?" James asked once we were safely away. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I do know he values the Thornwood reputation above everything. If exposing the truth publicly is the alternative, he'll find a way to manage it on his terms." What I didn't say, what I couldn't quite articulate even to myself, was the hollow victory this represented. I had lost my family not just to their absence at my wedding, but to the realization that what I had thought was family had never truly existed. The Thornwoods weren't a family, they were a corporation built on secrets and control with my father as CEO. 2 days later I received a text from an unknown number: Storage Unit 247, Millfield Self-Storage. Code 8914. No signature, but I recognized Ethan's way of communicating: direct, minimal. What we found in that storage unit would change everything once more. The storage unit contained a lifetime of hidden truth. Boxes of documents, photographs, recorded conversations, an insurance policy my brother had been secretly assembling for years. There were files dating back to our grandfather's time, including original documents proving his innocence that my father had suppressed. Most shocking were the surveillance reports, not just on the affected families like the Hendersons, but on everyone in my father's orbit, including his own family members. He had Nana's medical staff reporting to him, I whispered, reading through one file. He knew what medications she was taking, what she said during therapy sessions. James looked up from another box. There are recordings of your mother's phone calls here, years of them. The violation was staggering, not just of privacy, but of the most basic trust that should exist within a family. My father hadn't just controlled our public image, he had monitored our most private moments, using information as leverage to maintain his power. Among the documents was a sealed envelope addressed to me in Ethan's handwriting. Inside was a brief note: "I've been collecting these since I learned the truth at 19. I was too much of a coward to use them." You weren't. The code to the security system at the house is now 2218. Mom and Dad are at the Lake Geneva property until Thursday. Nana should know the truth too. It was as close to an apology and alliance as my brother could offer. I called him immediately, but the line went to voicemail. When I tried to text, the message bounced back. He had already changed his number, severing the connection that might implicate him in helping us. That evening, James, Derek, and I began organizing the evidence, creating digital copies and secure backups. Derek, whose IT security expertise proved invaluable, helped establish a digital dead man switch. If we didn't input a code every 2 hours, all the information would automatically be sent to law enforcement agencies, news outlets, and affected families. "This is powerful leverage," Derek said, scanning through financial records. "But using it means potentially destroying a lot of lives, not just your father's." "I know," I acknowledged. "That's why we're going to try one more approach first." The next morning, I called Nana and asked if she would meet me alone, away from the main house, without telling my parents. She agreed immediately, her voice containing a mixture of relief and apprehension that suggested she had been waiting for this moment. We met at a small cafe in neighboring Bedford, far enough from Millfield to avoid community gossip. Nana looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, but her eyes lit with genuine joy when she saw me. After a tearful embrace, we settled at a corner table. "I've made a terrible mistake, my darling," she said before I could speak. "Allowing your father to dictate terms about your wedding, not standing up for you. Fear makes cowards of us all, but that's no excuse." "It's not just about the wedding, Nana," I said, gently opening my bag to show her some of the key documents I'd brought. "There's so much more you need to know." For the next 2 hours, I carefully explained everything we had discovered about my grandfather, about Gerald Nichols, about my father's decades of deception and control. Nana listened without interruption, her expression cycling through shock, grief, and finally a hardened resolve I had never seen before. "Your grandfather was a good man," she said when I finished. "I never believed what they said about him. Richard forbade me from even mentioning Walter's name after he died. Said it was too painful for everyone." She shook her head slowly. "I should have known better, should have questioned more." "What do we do now?" I asked. "Father has agreed to clear grandfather's name and end the surveillance, but only under threat of exposure. That's not real change. That's not justice." Nana reached across the table to take my hands in her weathered ones. "Justice isn't always what we think it should be, Cassidy. Sometimes it's just the truth finally seeing light. I know what needs to be done now." The plan came together over the following days. Nana, with her unique position of trust in the family, would confront my father with what we knew, not as a threat, but as a mother, demanding accountability from her son. Meanwhile, I would arrange a gathering of key figures in this decades-long drama, representatives from the affected families, including James's parents, community leaders who had been present during the original scandal, and my mother and brother who deserved to hear the full truth. The confrontation took place at Nana's guest house, neutral territory within the family property. My father arrived expecting a private family discussion about my unreasonable demands. Instead, he found himself facing not only Nana and me, but witnesses to his decades of manipulation. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice cold with fury when he saw the assembled group. "This is accountability," Nana replied with quiet dignity. "Something long overdue in this family." What followed was unlike anything I could have imagined. For 3 hours the truth emerged piece by piece. My father initially denied, then deflected, then attempted to control the narrative. But faced with irrefutable evidence and his mother's unwavering insistence on honesty, his careful facade finally began to crumble. "I did what was necessary," he insisted repeatedly. "The family name, the business, our place in the community was built on lies," my mother interrupted, her voice shaking with emotion. This was new territory for Diana Thornwood, who had spent decades as the perfect corporate wife. "All these years, Richard, all these years, I thought we were protecting something worthy." The most powerful moment came when James's father addressed my father directly. "You've been paying us for years thinking money could balance the scales. But all we ever wanted was the truth. Walter didn't destroy our investments, you did by hiding what really happened." By the end, something fundamental had shifted. Not a miraculous transformation, my father was too deeply entrenched in his worldview for that, but a reckoning that could not be undone. The truth was now in the open, witnessed by those who mattered. The aftermath unfolded gradually. My father, under Nana's supervision, issued a formal statement clearing my grandfather's name, presenting evidence of Gerald Nichols' crimes. The affected families received proper acknowledgement and formal apologies. The surveillance operations were dismantled, the operatives dismissed. My relationship with my parents entered a complex new phase, not reconciliation exactly, but a cautious rebuilding on more honest terms. My mother, once freed from my father's controlling influence, revealed herself to be stronger and more independent than I had ever witnessed. She moved temporarily into Nana's guest house, establishing boundaries with my father for perhaps the first time in their marriage. Ethan and I maintained careful contact, our shared knowledge of family secrets, creating a bond that, while fragile, felt more authentic than our previous relationship had ever been. 6 months after the confrontation, James and I held a vow renewal ceremony, the celebration we should have had the first time. My mother attended, as did Nana, and surprisingly, Ethan. My father did not, but sent a brief note: "Your terms have been met, I wish you both well." It wasn't forgiveness or love, but it was perhaps the beginning of respect. As I stood with James, surrounded by people who truly cared for us rather than what we represented, I realized that family is not defined by blood or name, but by truth and genuine connection. The Thornwood legacy of secrets had been broken. Whatever came next would be built on a foundation of honesty, painful, complex, but real. Thank you all for joining me on this journey through my family's darkest secrets and the path to healing. If you've ever experienced family betrayal or had to confront painful truths, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Has karma or justice played a role in your family dynamics? How did you navigate through it? Please hit that like button if this resonated with you, and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about family truth, redemption. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that sometimes standing up for the truth is the greatest form of family loyalty. I'm grateful for each of you being part of my extended family here. Remember, sometimes the family we choose gives us the strength to face the family we were born into. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.